This is our CS2316 final project by Zach Nickerson.
And Jeff Rothwell.
So a quick little table of contents. We have the introduction, then going through the cleaning process, all of our insights and visualizations, and then a conclusion in the last couple. And first off, we are once again asking you for a 100 on phase 3. And our goal for phase 3 was to look for correlations between certain metrics of universities and the amount of COVID, either tests, hospitalizations, deaths, and other statistics like that. And what we're looking to find is a correlation between higher level universities within states and those states, higher level of tests, lower number of deaths, and statistics like that. And so here's our cleaning process. How we started looking for our sources was we were looking through the examples and we were looking for something that interested us and we could relate to, and we ended up stumbling upon the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, where we found some data that we didn't end up using but piqued our interest and helped us specify our searches and narrow down what we were looking for, where we ended up finding our data on healthdata.gov and ncsesdata.nsf.gov. And here you can see just kind of the cleaning process for all of our what ended up being insights and visualizations. Just like stuff like .fill NA, dropping lots of unwanted columns, going through lots and lots of tags, stripping all of them so we could put them back into the data frame and all that good stuff.
Picking up where he left off, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and that is no more true ever than right here with this one right here, particular for our project. And to keep it short, this is not a insight or visualization that we collected for this phase of the project, but it's one of the clean data sets that we used or found in phase 2. And it has 6 different columns, 2 of which we're going to be referencing the most due to the nature of our project, that being these 2. And it is the top 50 and lowest 50 in terms of research and development expenditures in America. This was collected in 2021. But using this data, we're hoping to be able to draw stronger correlations and conclusions regarding the impact of COVID in varying states based on the type of colleges that are in these states, for example. So keeping that in mind, we have our first insight, being insight 1. And we wanted to just first get some baseline overall data that we can compare for other insights and reference back to that research and development chart. So we found the percentage of all tests that were positive and negative per state and ordered it in descending order of those tests. Through this, we're hoping to see the amount of numbers of COVID tests that each state has, and then what percentage of them are positive and negative, and what the implications that has. And one thing that's important to notice is that both California and New York, there are some other ones distributed throughout here, but they have the most COVID tests and also extremely low percentages. California and New York are both in the bottom 10 states for positive percentage, meaning they have the lowest, some of the lowest. And that becomes more significant with Insight 2, which was another clean data frame we went through. We found, in taking that clean data frame we went through, and it had multiple statistics per day over the last 3 years of each state. So for each day from 2020, around when the COVID hit, up until now, we have information on each state and a few categories. In our interest, particularly, we wanted to see the deaths throughout the entire time of this period. So we manipulated the data frame so we could see which states had the most deaths and which ones had the least. And this is significant, particularly for the point I just made in the last insight, because despite having an incredibly low percentage of positive tests, New York and California both have 1 and 2, respectively, COVID deaths. So what exactly does that mean? Well, we use our visualization 1, the first one that we gathered, to answer that. And this visualization is divided up by state, and it shows how many deaths occurred per inpatient bed used by COVID. So if someone was admitted to the hospital for COVID, this is the percent of which died. And using this, we get a better idea of how the states took care of the patients from 2020 to 2022 as time went on and exposure to COVID increased. And particularly, we used a data frame, or a differential rather, from our data frame that compares the care from 2022 to 2020. So the ones on the right had a better differential, meaning there was less deaths, and the ones on the left over here in the negatives had a worse differential, meaning they actually treated them more poorly, or at the very minimum, more people died. And the reason this is significant, particularly for states like California and New York, is because they lie here. It's hard to see, unfortunately, based on the depths of the bar charts, but they lie in this region, which means that they had little to no significant change in that ratio, which is good. And then continuing off of that, it's notable that California had Stanford, UCLA, LA, and San Francisco all in the top 10 for research and development. And Massachusetts had Harvard, ranked 9, MIT, ranked 23, and then finally New York had Cornell as ranked 12, Columbia as ranked 21, and New York ranked 25th. All back to this right here. So keeping that in mind, we're able to draw a little bit more of a conclusion between the care of COVID and also the education per state with that measure.
The goal for our third insight was to find the largest differences, both positive and negative, in the amount of STEM degrees in each state. And then we put in this data frame the top 10 differentials, the 5 worst and the 5 best. So as you can see here, Washington had the greatest increase from the year 2000 to 2020, and Utah had the greatest decrease from 2000 to 2020. And there's 3 here that we want to note specifically. Michigan, first off, keeps coming up in our data for schools in a positive manner, but their overall COVID effects were very towards the medium, slightly leaning positive, but nothing very well to correlate. But Virginia and South Dakota here both have a negative differential, meaning that they had less STEM degrees in 2020 than in the year 2000. And this is significant because they were affected by COVID very much so. South Dakota actually had the least amount of COVID tests taken in the United States. And on top of this, both of these are in the top 25% of positive COVID tests overall reported. And that is very significant because South Dakota, as I just said, had the least amount of tests taken, but one of the higher percentages of positive tests. And that can be seen here. So our second visualization is a scatter plot, which just easily shows us the percentage of negative and positive tests per state. And this takes out large populations because it is a percentage of the overall tests. So as you can see over here, we have a very low positive percent rate by Massachusetts at 4.4, and over here we had Oklahoma at 21% of positive tests. And Oklahoma is one we want to note here because they have the highest percent of positive tests, like I said, at 21, but they have no schools in the top 50 for research and development expenditures. And last, just a fun little visualization here. This is not one of our actual visualizations, something we found during our research. Georgia actually had 87% of its tests were negative, 12% of its tests were positive, and then 1% of that was inconclusive.
For this insight, we wanted to kind of get straight to the point, a little bit more involved with our age group in particular. And using the group by ME function, we were able to get a data frame that had given us the average admissions per day with COVID, obviously, for the age groups we were looking at, that being college kids, 18 to 19, and then young adults, 20 to 29. And looking at this, you can kind of take a look at Texas. Their 18 to 19 is 17.5, whereas it's 31 for 20 to 29, which is kind of interesting. But moving on, we have our visualization 3, which is a box plot, and it's important because it helps helps our project rather, because it helps us predict how accurate our data might be for each state. And the more tests taken for each state, we assume that the more accurate the data would be because our sample size is larger. And taking a look at this right here with what we collected, you see that California and New York both here are outliers on the plot, but on the larger side, meaning that their data is likely to be accurate due to the increased sample space, or size rather. And it is unfortunate because we can't see the individual states within this plot, but referencing the data in which they came from and then observing how they fall into the general trend is a useful thing to have in terms of predicting COVID handle management per state. And for our final insight, we have this little insight over here. And using the sum and count function, we were able to find the average deaths per inpatient beds used for COVID in 2020, 2021, and 2022, which, as you'll probably know, is familiar because that was visualization 1. By getting that differential, subtracting 2022 from 2020, we're able to get that differential, and it helps us understand if a state improved or got worse at their ability to handle patients once they were already admitted to the hospital. And us particularly, we noted that Virginia has the highest difference, which was a staggering negative 16.25%.
In conclusion, we found multiple positive correlations between states, their schools, and the effect of COVID on their state. The best examples of this are going to be California, Massachusetts, and New York, who all ranked very high in school research and development expenditures, and also had lots of COVID tests taken with a very low percentage of positive tests of those. And then on the other side of that, we had South Dakota, Virginia, and Oklahoma, who did not rank well with schools, and on top of that, also had bad statistics for COVID, such as bad testing or very bad positive percentages. Thank you for watching, and Merry Christmas.